Jake sat at his desk, staring blankly at the computer screen in front of him. The office buzzed with the usual activity, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, and the low hum of conversation. But for Jake, it all seemed distant, muffled. His mind was still processing the news he'd just received. "We're letting you go, Jake," his manager had said, her voice a mix of rehearsed professionalism and awkward sympathy. "Your position is being eliminated due to restructuring." The words echoed in his head as he mechanically began to pack up his belongings. 5 years of his life, countless late nights and missed weekends, all reduced to a cardboard box of personal items. Jake's colleagues avoided eye contact as he made his way to the elevator, their discomfort palpable. As the elevator descended, Jake felt a weight settling on his chest. He'd poured everything into this job, believing it was the key to success and fulfillment. Now, standing on the busy New York sidewalk, he felt utterly lost. Jake wandered the streets, oblivious to the bustling city around him. His mind raced with questions and self-doubt. Where had he gone wrong? Was he not good enough? The uncertainty of his future loomed large, casting a shadow over every step. He found himself in Central Park, surrounded by people enjoying their lunch breaks or tourists snapping photos. Jake sat on a bench, his box of office belongings at his feet. He watched as joggers passed by, children played, and couples strolled hand in hand. Their lives seemed to move forward with purpose and direction, while his had come to a screeching halt. As the afternoon wore on, Jake's thoughts turned increasingly dark. He'd always defined himself by his career, his ambition. Without that, who was he? The weight of his perceived failure pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. Lost in his thoughts, Jake almost didn't notice the woman sitting on a nearby bench. She was dressed in worn, ill-fitting clothes, her hair unkempt. Her eyes held a sadness that resonated with Jake's own despair. Without thinking, Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside was the last of his cash, 2 crumpled $20 bills he'd been saving for lunch. In a moment of impulse, he stood up and approached the woman. "Excuse me," he said softly. The woman looked up, startled. "I thought you might be able to use this." Jake held out the money, feeling slightly awkward, but compelled to follow through. The woman hesitated, her eyes searching Jake's face. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, pressing the bills into her hand. "Please, take it. I hope it helps." As he turned to walk away, Jake felt a small spark of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't happiness exactly, but a momentary lightening of the heaviness he'd been carrying. For just a second, he'd forgotten his own troubles and connected with another human being. Jake continued his aimless walk through the park, his mind still churning with worries about his future. But now, mixed in with the anxiety and self-doubt, was a tiny glimmer of something else. A reminder that, even in his darkest moment, he was capable of kindness. As the sun began to set, Jake finally made his way home to his small apartment. He set the box of belongings on the kitchen counter and collapsed onto his couch. The reality of his situation began to sink in. He'd need to start job hunting immediately, update his resume, reach out to contacts. The task seemed insurmountable. Yet, as he lay there contemplating his next steps, Jake found himself thinking about the woman in the park. He wondered if the money had made a difference for her, if it had provided a meal or a moment of relief. It was a small act, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but it had been something he could control in a day where everything else had spiraled beyond his grasp. Jake drifted off to sleep, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. His dreams were a jumble of office scenes and park benches, of falling and reaching out. And somewhere in the midst of it all, a faint but persistent idea began to take root. The notion that perhaps there was more to life than climbing the corporate ladder, that true fulfillment might lie in unexpected places. Several days passed since Jake's unexpected dismissal. He'd spent most of that time in a haze of job applications and unanswered emails, his apartment becoming a cocoon of uncertainty and self-doubt. The constant rejection was wearing him down, each "thank you for your interest" email chipping away at his already fragile self-esteem. It was mid-morning when Jake's phone rang, startling him from his listless scrolling through job listings. The number was unfamiliar, and for a moment, he considered letting it go to voicemail. But desperation for any potential lead pushed him to answer. "Hello, Jake speaking," he said, trying to inject some enthusiasm into his voice. "Hello, Jake. This is Emily. We met in Central Park a few days ago." Jake's mind raced, trying to place the voice. Then it hit him, the woman he'd given money to. But how did she have his number? Yes, I remember," he stammered, confusion evident in his tone. "I'm calling because I have something important to discuss with you," Emily continued, her voice now clear and authoritative. "I'm the new CEO of Stellar Corp, and I'd like to meet with you." Jake felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. Stellar Corp was the company that had just fired him, and now this woman, whom he'd last seen looking disheveled and destitute in the park, was claiming to be its new CEO. I'm sorry, but I don't understand," Jake managed to say, his mind whirling. "How is this possible?" Emily's voice softened slightly. "I know this must be confusing for you, Jake. That's why I'd like to meet in person to explain everything. Can you come to the Stellar Corp offices this afternoon?" Still reeling, Jake agreed to the meeting. As he hung up the phone, he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Had he imagined the whole encounter in the park? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Jake spent the next few hours in a state of nervous anticipation. He showered, shaved, and put on his best suit, the one he'd worn to countless interviews in the past week. As he made his way to the familiar Stellar Corp building, his mind raced with possibilities and questions. The receptionist greeted him warmly and directed him to the top floor, the executive suite he'd only glimpsed from afar during his time at the company. As the elevator ascended, Jake's heart pounded in his chest. The doors opened to reveal a sleek, modern office, and there, standing by a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, was Emily. She was transformed from the woman he'd met in the park. Dressed in an impeccable suit, her hair neatly styled, she exuded confidence and authority. "Jake, thank you for coming," Emily said, extending her hand. "Please have a seat." As they sat down, Emily began to explain. "What you experienced in the park was part of a larger initiative I've undertaken since becoming CEO. I've been conducting a series of tests to evaluate the culture of this company and the character of its employees." Jake listened, stunned, as Emily detailed her unconventional approach. She explained how she'd disguised herself as a homeless person, placing herself in various locations around the city where Stellar Corp employees frequented. "Your act of kindness stood out, Jake," Emily said, her eyes meeting his. "In a week where I was ignored, avoided, and even treated with disdain by countless employees, you were the only one who showed genuine compassion." Jake's mind was reeling. He thought back to that day in the park, how lost and defeated he'd felt. "But I'd just been fired," he said, struggling to understand. "I wasn't even an employee anymore." Emily nodded. "That's what makes your actions even more remarkable. You had every reason to be bitter, to turn inward. Instead, you chose kindness." As Emily continued to explain her vision for the company, one that prioritized empathy, social responsibility, and employee well-being alongside profitability, Jake found himself both impressed and slightly overwhelmed. "I want to offer you a position, Jake," Emily said finally. "Not your old job, but something new. A role where you can help shape the culture of this company, to make it a place that values the kind of compassion you demonstrated." Jake sat in silence for a moment, processing everything he'd heard. The whirlwind of emotions, from confusion to disbelief to a tentative hope, left him speechless. "I know this is a lot to take in," Emily said gently. "Take some time to think about it. But know that your small act of kindness has already set bigger changes in motion." As Jake left the office that afternoon, his head spinning with the day's revelations, he felt a glimmer of something he hadn't experienced in a long time: purpose. The future, which had seemed so bleak just hours ago, now held new possibilities. He stepped out onto the busy New York street, the city humming with its usual energy. But now, Jake saw it through new eyes. Every passerby, every interaction held the potential for kindness, for change. And for the first time in weeks, he felt ready to embrace whatever came next. A week after his surprising meeting with Emily, Jake found himself back at Stellar Corp, this time as part of the new leadership team. He sat in a spacious conference room, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, the other members of Emily's hand-picked group, tasked with transforming the company. Emily stood at the head of the table, her presence commanding attention. "Today," she began, "we start reshaping Stellar Corp. Our goal is to create a company that not only excels in the market, but also leads in social responsibility and employee well-being." Jake listened intently as Emily outlined her vision. She spoke of flexible work hours, mental health support, community outreach programs, and a complete overhaul of the company's environmental policies. It was ambitious, to say the least. As the meeting progressed, Jake noticed the mix of reactions around the table. Some nodded enthusiastically, clearly on board with Emily's ideas. Others looked skeptical, their brows furrowed in concern. One executive, a man in his 50s who Jake recognized as a longtime board member, spoke up. "These are admirable goals, Emily, but how do we ensure they don't impact our bottom line? Our shareholders expect results." Emily smiled, unfazed. "That's precisely why you're all here. We need to find innovative ways to marry profitability with social good. It's not an either-or situation." Jake felt a surge of excitement. This was so different from the cutthroat, profit-at-all-costs mentality he'd experienced before. He raised his hand, surprising himself with his newfound confidence. "What if we start with small changes?" Jake suggested. "We could implement a volunteer program, giving employees paid time off for community service. It could boost morale and our public image." Emily nodded approvingly, and Jake felt a burst of pride. But he also noticed a few eye rolls and whispers among the more skeptical executives. As the meeting concluded, Jake could feel the tension in the room. Emily's approach was radical for a company like Stellar Corp, and not everyone was convinced. Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into his new role. He worked on developing the volunteer program he'd suggested, coordinating with local charities and drafting policy proposals. The work was challenging but fulfilling in a way his old job never had been. However, as the initial excitement wore off, Jake began to notice the growing resistance to Emily's changes. In the break room, he overheard hushed conversations about unrealistic expectations and jeopardizing shareholder value. Some longtime employees seemed to view the new initiatives as a threat to the status quo. One afternoon, Jake was working late when he overheard a heated discussion in a nearby office. He recognized the voices of two senior executives. "This new direction is going to tank us," one voice said. "All this talk about social good is well and good, but it's not what we're here for. We need to push back before it's too late." Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. He knew Emily's vision wouldn't be an easy sell, but he hadn't realized how deep the opposition ran. The next day, during a check-in with Emily, Jake hesitated before bringing up what he'd overheard. "I think some of the executives are worried about the changes," he said carefully. "They're concerned about the impact on our financial performance." Emily sighed, looking momentarily tired. "I expected this," she said. Change is never easy, especially in a company this size. But I believe in what we're doing, Jake. We just need to prove that it can work. As Jake left Emily's office, he felt the weight of the challenge ahead. He believed in Emily's vision, in the idea that a company could be both profitable and socially responsible. But he also understood the fear of change, the comfort of the familiar. That evening, as Jake worked on his latest proposal, he received an email that made his heart sink. The board of directors had called for an emergency meeting to discuss the company's new direction. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding recent policy changes." Jake stared at his computer screen, a mix of emotions washing over him. He knew this meeting could make or break everything Emily had been working towards. And suddenly, he realized how invested he'd become in this new vision of what Stellar Corp could be. As he shut down his computer and prepared to leave for the day, Jake felt a renewed sense of determination. He knew the road ahead would be tough, but he was ready to fight for this new direction. Because for the first time in his career, he felt like he was part of something truly meaningful. Walking out of the office, Jake took a deep breath of the evening air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new opportunities. And he was ready to face them head on. The day after Jake learned about the board's emergency meeting, Emily invited him to lunch. They chose a small, quiet cafe a few blocks from the office, away from the prying eyes and ears of their colleagues. As they settled into a corner booth, Jake couldn't help but notice the fatigue etched on Emily's face. The past few weeks had clearly taken their toll. "I wanted to talk to you away from the office," Emily began, stirring her coffee absently. "I know things have been tense lately, and I thought it might help if we understood each other better." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "I'd like that," he said. Emily took a deep breath. "I grew up in a small town in the Midwest," she started. "My parents owned a small grocery store. It wasn't much, but it was the heart of our community. They knew everyone's name, extended credit to families going through tough times, donated to local causes. They taught me that business could be about more than just profit." Jake listened intently as Emily continued her story. She spoke of her journey through business school, her early career in cutthroat corporate environments, and the growing disillusionment she felt with the relentless pursuit of profit at any cost. "I saw companies destroying lives and communities in the name of shareholder value," Emily said, her voice tight with emotion. "I knew there had to be a better way." As Emily shared her experiences, Jake found himself opening up as well. He told her about his own background, growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn, watching his parents struggle to make ends meet. He spoke of his drive to succeed, to climb the corporate ladder, and how empty that success had felt when he finally achieved it. "When I lost my job," Jake admitted, "it felt like my whole world had collapsed. But in a way, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. It made me realize there's more to life than just chasing the next promotion or bonus." Emily nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That's exactly why I wanted you on this team, Jake. You've seen both sides. You understand the drive for success, but you also understand the importance of compassion and community." As they continued to talk, Jake felt a growing connection with Emily. Despite their different backgrounds, they shared a common vision for what business could be, a force for good in the world, not just a machine for generating wealth. "I won't lie to you, Jake," Emily said as their lunch drew to a close. "The road ahead is going to be tough. There are powerful people who don't want to see us succeed. They're comfortable with the way things are, and change scares them." Jake nodded, thinking of the overheard conversations and the upcoming board meeting. "I know," he said, "but I believe in what we're doing. I think it's worth fighting for." Emily smiled, the first genuine smile Jake had seen from her in days. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, "because I'm going to need your help. The board meeting tomorrow. It's not going to be easy, but if we stand together, If we can show them that our vision is not just idealistic but practical and profitable, we might just have a chance. As they walked back to the office, Jake felt a renewed sense of purpose. The conversation had reminded him why he'd agreed to take on this challenge in the first place. It wasn't just about a job or a paycheck anymore. It was about making a real difference, about proving that business could be a force for good in the world. Back at his desk, Jake threw himself into preparation for the board meeting. He gathered data on companies that had successfully implemented similar policies, compiled projections showing the potential long-term benefits of their initiatives, and drafted talking points to address the board's likely concerns. As the day wore on and the office emptied out, Jake noticed he wasn't the only one burning the midnight oil. Through the glass walls of her office, he could see Emily still at her desk, poring over documents and making phone calls. Just as he was about to leave for the night, Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "Thank you for today. It's good to know I'm not in this fight alone." Jake smiled as he replied, "We're in this together. See you tomorrow." As he made his way home, Jake felt a mix of anxiety and determination. Tomorrow's meeting would be a crucial test, not just for Emily's leadership, but for the very soul of Stellar Corp. But for the first time since this journey began, Jake felt truly ready for the challenge ahead. The morning of the board meeting arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Jake entered the office earlier than usual, his stomach knotted with anticipation. As he made his way to his desk, he noticed hushed conversations abruptly halting as he passed by. In the break room, Jake encountered Karen, one of the senior directors known for her ruthless efficiency and unwavering focus on the bottom line. She greeted him with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Big day today, Jake," Karen said, her tone deceptively casual. "I hope Emily's prepared for some tough questions from the board. They're not too pleased with all these changes." Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "I'm sure she is," he replied, careful not to reveal any doubts. As he turned to leave, Karen added, "You know, Jake, it's not too late to distance yourself from all this. Your future at Stellar Corp doesn't have to be tied to Emily's experiment." The implied threat in Karen's words was clear. Jake simply nodded again and left, his mind racing. He'd underestimated the level of opposition they were facing. Throughout the morning, Jake noticed Karen moving from one executive's office to another, engaged in intense, whispered conversations. He couldn't hear what was being said, but the furtive glances in his direction told him enough. During a quick meeting with Emily before the board presentation, Jake shared his concerns. "I think Karen's trying to turn people against us," he said. "She's been talking to everyone, and I overheard her questioning the financial viability of our initiatives." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "I expected as much," she said. "Karen's been with the company for a long time. She has a lot of influence, and she's not afraid to use it. We'll need to be prepared for anything in that boardroom." As they wrapped up their meeting, Emily placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Remember why we're doing this, Jake. It's not just about profits or pleasing shareholders. It's about creating a company that makes a real difference in people's lives." Jake nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. They had worked too hard to give up now. The hours leading up to the board meeting were a flurry of last-minute preparations. Jake refined their presentation, double-checked their financial projections, and rehearsed responses to potential objections. Just before they were due to enter the boardroom, Jake received an unexpected visit from Tom, one of the junior analysts he'd worked with in his previous role. Tom looked nervous as he approached Jake's desk. "I thought you should know," Tom said in a low voice, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. "Karen's been telling people that the new initiatives are tanking our stock price. She's got some charts and graphs to show the board. But Jake, I've looked at the data, and it's misleading. She's cherry-picking information to make things look worse than they are." Jake thanked Tom for the information, his mind already working on how to counter Karen's claims. As he headed to the boardroom, He sent a quick text to Emily, warning her about what to expect. The boardroom was silent as Jake and Emily entered. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake scanned the faces around the table, some curious, some skeptical, and some, like Karen's, openly hostile. As Emily began her presentation, Jake could see Karen shifting impatiently in her seat. When it came time for questions, Karen was the first to speak up. "While these initiatives sound nice in theory," Karen began, her voice dripping with condescension, "the reality is that they're hurting our bottom line. Our stock price has taken a hit, and shareholders are getting nervous." She proceeded to pull up a series of graphs, showing a downward trend in Stellar Corp's stock price over the past month. The other board members murmured in concern. Jake felt his heart racing, but he forced himself to remain calm. This was the moment they had prepared for. As Emily began to respond, Jake quietly pulled up their own data on his tablet, ready to counter Karen's misleading information. The battle lines were drawn. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that this was more than just a discussion about company policy. It was a fight for the very soul of Stellar Corp, and the outcome would shape the company's future for years to come. In the days following the tense board meeting, Jake and Emily threw themselves into planning a company-wide charity event. They saw it as an opportunity to showcase their new vision for Stellar Corp and to bring employees together around a common cause. "We need to show everyone that our approach isn't just talk," Emily explained during a strategy session. "This event will be a tangible demonstration of our commitment to social responsibility." Jake nodded, his mind already racing with ideas. "What if we make it a day-long event? We could have different stations set up for various charitable activities, assembling care packages for the homeless, a blood drive, maybe even a community cleanup effort." Emily's eyes lit up. "I love it. And we could invite local nonprofits to set up booths, give them a platform to share their work." As they dove into the planning, Jake found himself energized by the challenge. This was so different from his old job, where success was measured solely in dollars and cents. Here, they were working to create something meaningful, something that could make a real difference in people's lives. The weeks leading up to the event were a whirlwind of activity. Jake coordinated with local charities, organized volunteers, and worked on logistics. He was surprised to find many employees eagerly volunteering their time and ideas. It seemed that despite the resistance from some quarters, there was a genuine appetite for change among the rank and file. Not everyone was on board, of course. Jake often caught sight of Karen and her allies watching the preparations with thinly veiled skepticism. He overheard snippets of conversation. Waste of resources and PR stunt were common refrains. But Jake refused to let it dampen his enthusiasm. The day of the event dawned bright and clear. Jake arrived at the office early, his stomach fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. The company's large atrium had been transformed overnight into a bustling hub of activity. Colorful banners hung from the ceiling, and dozens of booths lined the walls, each representing a different charity or volunteer opportunity. As employees began to filter in, Jake watched their reactions closely. There were looks of surprise, curiosity, and in many cases, genuine excitement. He saw people he'd never spoken to before, chatting animatedly as they signed up for various activities. Emily made her way through the crowd, stopping to talk with employees and representatives from the charities. Jake marveled at her ability to connect with people, to make each person feel heard and valued. "This is amazing, Jake," she said when she reached him, her eyes shining. "Look at everyone coming together like this. This is exactly what I hoped for." As the day progressed, Jake found himself swept up in the energy of the event. He helped assemble care packages, chatted with charity representatives, and even convinced a group of initially reluctant executives to join a community cleanup effort. One moment stood out to Jake. He was helping at the blood drive station when he saw Karen approach, She looked around with an expression Jake couldn't quite read. Was it curiosity? Skepticism? But to his surprise, after a moment's hesitation, she rolled up her sleeve and sat down to donate blood. As the event wound down, Jake felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The atrium was buzzing with conversation, laughter, and a palpable sense of camaraderie. Employees who normally barely acknowledged each other were exchanging contact information, making plans to volunteer together in the future. Emily found Jake as the last of the charity representatives were packing up. "We did it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Look around, Jake. This is what a company can be when it's driven by more than just profit." Jake nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. He saw now that this wasn't just about changing company policies or improving their public image. They were changing the culture of Stellar Corp from the ground up, creating a sense of purpose and community that went beyond the bottom line. As they stood there, taking in the scene, a group of employees approached them. "Thank you for organizing this," one of them said. "It's the first time I felt proud to work here in years." Jake caught Emily's eye, seeing his own emotions reflected there. They both knew that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more resistance to overcome. But for now, they had proof that their vision was possible. They had shown that a company could be a force for good in the world. As the last of the employees filed out, Jake began to help with the cleanup, his mind already spinning with ideas for their next initiative. The day had been a success, but it was only the first step on a long journey, and Jake was ready for whatever came next. 2 weeks after the successful charity event, Jake found himself standing outside the imposing doors of the main boardroom. The quarterly board meeting was about to begin, and he knew this would be a crucial moment for Emily's vision of a more socially responsible Stellar Corp. As he entered the room, Jake could feel the weight of expectation in the air. The board members were already seated, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Emily sat at the head of the table, her posture straight and confident, but Jake could see the tension in her shoulders. Karen was there too, her eyes narrowed as she watched Jake take his seat. The success of the charity event had clearly not swayed her opinion on the new direction of the company. As the meeting began, Jake listened intently as various department heads presented their quarterly reports. The numbers were promising. Productivity was up, employee satisfaction had improved, and there had been a noticeable uptick in positive media coverage following the charity event. But when it came time to discuss the financial implications of the new initiatives, the mood in the room shifted. Several board members expressed concern about the costs associated with the expanded employee benefits and community outreach programs. "These programs may make us feel good," one board member said, "but are they sustainable in the long term? We have a responsibility to our shareholders." Jake saw Emily take a deep breath, preparing to respond, but Karen beat her to it. "I think we need to seriously reconsider this new direction," Karen said, her voice sharp. "Our primary duty is to maximize shareholder value, not to run a charity." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Emily. This was the moment of truth. Jake felt his heart racing, knowing how much was riding on what happened next. Emily stood slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room. "I understand your concerns," she began, her voice steady. "But I want to challenge the notion that social responsibility and profitability are mutually exclusive." She nodded to Jake, who quickly pulled up a series of charts on the main screen. These graphs show the long-term financial performance of companies that have implemented similar initiatives, Emily explained. "As you can see, after an initial adjustment period, these companies consistently outperform their peers." Jake watched as the board members leaned in, studying the data with interest. But Karen wasn't backing down. "That may be true for other companies," she argued, "but Stellar Corp has always operated differently. Our success is built on a proven model. Why risk that for an unproven strategy?" Jake could see some board members nodding in agreement with Karen. The momentum was shifting away from them. Without thinking, he stood up. "If I may," Jake said, his voice stronger than he felt. All eyes turned to him, and he saw Emily give him an encouraging nod. "I've been with Stellar Corp for years," Jake began. "I've seen firsthand the toll our old way of doing business took on our employees and our community. But I've also seen the incredible potential we have to make a positive impact." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The charity event wasn't just a PR stunt. It was a demonstration of what we can achieve when we align our business goals with social responsibility. We saw increased employee engagement, improved team cohesion, and a surge in positive public sentiment. Jake could see he had the board's attention now. He pressed on, his voice gaining confidence. "But more than that, we showed our employees and our community that Stellar Corp stands for something more than just profits. We're building a brand that people can believe in, that they want to be associated with." He turned to Karen. "You're right that our success was built on a proven model. But the world is changing. Consumers, especially younger generations, are increasingly making purchasing decisions based on a company's social and environmental impact. If we don't adapt, we risk becoming obsolete." The room was silent as Jake finished speaking. He could see the board members exchanging glances, processing his words. Even Karen looked thoughtful. Emily stepped in, building on Jake's momentum. "We're not suggesting we abandon our commitment to profitability," she said. "We're proposing a new model where social responsibility and financial success go hand in hand. It's not just the right thing to do, it's good business." As the discussion continued, Jake could sense a shift in the room. The skepticism was giving way to curiosity and even excitement. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had made their case. As the meeting drew to a close, Jake caught Emily's eye. She gave him a small smile of gratitude and pride. They both knew this was just one battle in a longer war, but it was a crucial victory. Walking out of the boardroom, Jake felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He had found his voice, standing up not just for Emily's vision, but for what he truly believed in. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them. As Jake left the boardroom, still buzzing from the intensity of the meeting, he was surprised to hear someone call his name. Turning, he saw Richard Klein, one of the most influential board members, approaching him. "Jake, do you have a moment?" Richard asked, gesturing towards an empty conference room nearby. Curious and slightly apprehensive, Jake followed him in. Richard was known for his shrewd business acumen and had been largely silent during the meeting. Once inside, Richard turned to Jake with an unexpected smile. "That was quite a speech you gave in there," he said. "I have to admit, I was skeptical about this new direction, but you've given me a lot to think about." Jake felt a surge of relief and pride. "Thank you, sir. I really believe in what we're trying to do here." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I can see that, and that's what impressed me the most. Your passion, combined with the hard data you and Emily presented. It's a compelling case." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "I've been in this business a long time, Jake. I've seen trends come and go. But what you're proposing, I think it might be the future of corporate America." Jake listened, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Was this powerful, influential man really endorsing their vision? "Of course," Richard continued, "it won't be easy. There will be resistance both internally and from our competitors. But I think you're onto something important here." He reached out and shook Jake's hand firmly. "You've got my support. Keep pushing forward with this. I'll do what I can to bring some of the other board members around." As Jake left the conference room, his mind was reeling. Richard's support could be a game changer. He rushed to find Emily, eager to share this unexpected development. He found her in her office, looking drained but relieved. Her face lit up as Jake relayed his conversation with Richard. "This is incredible, Jake," Emily said, her eyes shining. Richard's influence could tip the scales in our favor. They spent the next hour excitedly discussing the implications of this new support and planning their next steps. The atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. They had won an important victory today, but both knew the real work was just beginning. As evening fell and the office emptied out, Jake and Emily found themselves alone, looking out over the city skyline from the executive floor. "We did it," Emily said softly. "We actually did it." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "It's just the start, though, isn't it?" Emily turned to him, her expression serious. "Yes, it is. And it's going to get harder from here. Karen won't give up easily. She'll regroup and come back stronger." Jake felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought, but pushed it aside. "We'll be ready for her," he said, with more confidence than he felt. Emily smiled, reaching out to squeeze his shoulder. "I'm glad you're with me on this, Jake. I couldn't do it without you." As they stood there, looking out at the city below, Jake felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd experienced in his career. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves, bigger than just one company. They were fighting to prove that business could be a force for good in the world. The next day, Jake arrived at the office early, eager to build on the momentum from the board meeting. As he walked to his desk, he noticed a group of employees huddled around the break room television. Curious, he joined them. A news anchor was mid-sentence. Stellar Corp's new initiatives have caused quite a stir in the business world. Some are calling it a revolutionary approach to corporate social responsibility. Jake watched, amazed, as the report continued, highlighting their recent charity event and hinting at the company's new direction. It seemed their efforts were already gaining attention beyond the walls of Stellar Corp. As he turned away from the TV, Jake caught sight of Karen watching from her office, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met for a moment, and Jake saw a flicker of something. Respect, challenge. Before she turned away, Jake settled at his desk, fired up by what he'd seen. They had made progress, gained some powerful allies, and were starting to change the narrative around Stellar Corp. But he knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead, turning their vision into lasting change. With renewed determination, Jake opened his computer and began to work. There was still so much to do, but for the first time, the future looked bright with possibility. The positive media coverage and Richard Klein's support had given Jake and Emily's initiatives a significant boost. However, as the weeks passed, Jake noticed a shift in the office atmosphere. Whispered conversations ceased when he approached, and he caught glimpses of furtive glances and worried expressions among some of the longtime employees. One morning, as Jake was getting coffee, Tom, the junior analyst who had warned him before the board meeting, approached him nervously. "Jake, I think you should know," Tom said in a low voice. "Karen's been holding secret meetings with some of the senior staff and board members. I couldn't hear much, but they were talking about correcting the course and protecting the company's interests." Jake thanked Tom for the information, his mind racing. He had expected pushback, but this sounded like a coordinated effort to undermine their progress. He immediately went to Emily's office to share what he'd learned. Emily listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "We knew Karen wouldn't give up easily," Emily said, "but this is more serious than I anticipated. We need to be prepared for whatever she's planning." Over the next few days, Jake and Emily worked tirelessly to shore up support for their initiatives. They met with employees at all levels, reinforcing the vision of a more socially responsible Stellar Corp and addressing concerns. They also reached out to their allies on the board, including Richard Klein, to keep them informed and engaged. Despite their efforts, Jake could sense the tension building. It came to a head one afternoon when he received an urgent message from Emily. "Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Karen's making her move. Jake spent a sleepless night preparing for the meeting, gathering data on the positive impacts of their initiatives and anticipating possible arguments against them. The next morning, Jake entered the boardroom to find an atmosphere thick with tension. Karen sat at one end of the table, surrounded by a group of senior executives, all wearing expressions of grim determination. As the meeting began, Karen wasted no time in launching her attack. "Members of the board," she began, her voice sharp, "I've called this meeting because I believe our company is in crisis. The recent changes in direction have put us on a dangerous path, one that threatens the very foundation of Stellar Corp." She proceeded to present a series of charts and graphs, showcasing what she claimed were negative trends in key financial indicators. "While we've been busy with feel-good initiatives," Karen argued, "our core business has been suffering. We're losing market share to competitors who remain focused on what really matters: profitability and shareholder value." Jake watched as concern spread across the faces of several board members. Karen's presentation was compelling, playing on their fears of financial instability. "Furthermore," Karen continued, "these new policies are causing unrest among our most valuable employees. Top performers are concerned about the shift in company culture and the potential impact on their bonuses and advancement opportunities." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I propose we immediately suspend all new initiatives and return to our proven business model. It's the only way to prevent further damage and reassure our shareholders." The room erupted into murmurs of discussion. Jake could see the doubt creeping into the eyes of even their supporters. He glanced at Emily, seeing his own worry reflected in her expression. Just as it seemed Karen had swayed the room, Richard Klein spoke up. "Before we make any hasty decisions," he said, his calm voice cutting through the chatter, "I think we should hear from Emily and Jake. They've been at the forefront of these changes, and I believe they deserve a chance to respond to these allegations." All eyes turned to Emily and Jake. This was their moment. Everything they had worked for hung in the balance. Emily stood, her posture straight and confident despite the pressure. "Thank you, Richard," she began. "I appreciate Karen's concerns, and I agree that we must always keep the health of our company in mind. However, I believe the picture painted here is incomplete and, frankly, misleading." Jake saw Karen's eyes narrow at this, but Emily pressed on. "Yes, we've seen some short-term fluctuations as we implement these changes. That's to be expected. But if we look at the broader trends..." She nodded to Jake, who quickly pulled up their own set of data on the screen. "These charts show a more comprehensive view of our performance," Emily explained. "As you can see, while there was an initial dip, we're already seeing signs of recovery and growth in key areas." Jake watched the board members lean in, studying the new data with interest. The tide was starting to turn, but he knew they needed something more to fully counter Karen's arguments. It was time for Jake to step up once again. Taking a deep breath, he stood to address the board, ready to fight for the future they believed in. Jake stood, his heart pounding, but his voice steady as he addressed the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I understand your concerns. Change is always difficult, especially when it challenges long-held beliefs about how business should be conducted." He paused, making eye contact with each board member. "But what we're proposing isn't just a feel-good initiative. It's a strategic move that positions Stellar Corp at the forefront of a shifting business landscape." Jake pulled up a new set of slides. These graphs show consumer trends over the past decade. As you can see, there's been a significant increase in consumers prioritizing companies with strong social and environmental policies. This isn't a passing fad. It's a fundamental shift in how people interact with brands. He could see he had their attention now. Even Karen was watching intently, though her expression remained skeptical. "Moreover," Jake continued, "our new policies have already begun to pay dividends in unexpected ways. Employee turnover, a significant cost for any company, has decreased by 15% since we implemented our new initiatives. Productivity is up, and we're seeing an influx of top-tier talent attracted by our new company culture." Just as Jake was building momentum, Emily stood up, a glint in her eye that he hadn't seen before. "If I may," she said, "there's something else the board should know." All eyes turned to Emily, curiosity piqued by her interruption. "I've been aware of Karen's concerns for some time," Emily said, her voice calm but firm. "In fact, I anticipated this pushback. That's why, over the past month, I've been conducting a series of confidential meetings with our largest shareholders and key industry leaders." Jake watched, as surprised as everyone else in the room. This was news to him. Emily continued, "I'm pleased to announce that not only do our major shareholders support our new direction, but we've also secured partnerships with 3 Fortune 500 companies who are eager to collaborate on our social responsibility initiatives." The room erupted in murmurs of surprise and excitement. Karen's face had gone pale. "Furthermore," Emily said, her voice rising above the chatter, "these partnerships come with significant contracts that will boost our revenue by an estimated 22% over the next fiscal year." The atmosphere in the room had completely shifted. Board members who had been frowning in concern were now nodding in approval. Jake caught Richard Klein's eye, seeing a smile of satisfaction on the older man's face. Emily wasn't finished, but perhaps most importantly, "I want to address Karen's concern about our employees. Yes, change can be unsettling, but rather than causing unrest, our new policies have invigorated our workforce." She nodded to Jake, who quickly pulled up the results of a recent employee satisfaction survey. The numbers were overwhelmingly positive. "Our employees aren't just accepting these changes," Emily said. "They're embracing them. They're proud to work for a company that stands for something more than just profit." As Emily concluded her presentation, the room fell silent. The board members looked at each other, a new energy palpable in the air. Karen, looking shaken but not defeated, attempted one last argument. "This all sounds promising," she said, "but how can we be sure these results will last? We're taking a big risk with the company's future." It was Richard Klein who answered, "Karen, in my experience, the biggest risk in business is failing to adapt. What Emily and Jake are proposing isn't just a risk, it's an opportunity to lead, to set a new standard for what a corporation can be." He turned to address the entire board. "I move that we fully endorse Emily's leadership in this new direction for Stellar Corp. All in favor?" One by one, hands went up around the table. Even those who had been skeptical were now nodding in agreement. Karen, seeing the tide had turned decisively against her, reluctantly raised her hand as well. As the meeting adjourned, Jake felt a mixture of exhaustion and elation. They had done it. They had not only defended their vision, but had secured the full backing of the board. Emily approached him, a warm smile on her face. "We did it, Jake. But this is just the beginning. Now the real work starts." Jake nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I'm ready," he said. As they left the boardroom, Jake reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. From a disillusioned ex-employee to a key player in reshaping one of the largest corporations in the country. He realized that his act of kindness in the park that day hadn't just changed Emily's life. It had changed his own, and now it was poised to change countless others. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt genuinely excited about what lay ahead. Stellar Corp was embarking on a new chapter, and he was proud to be a part of it.